This Fleet Equipment Unscripted interview is presented by Hendrickson, a leading manufacturer of heavy-duty suspension systems and components to the global commercial transportation industry. Visit hendrickson-intl.com to learn more.
Hi, everyone. I am Jason Morgan, Content Director for Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today, we're talking with Tanya Pecorari, producer at the Graham Company. Tanya, thanks for joining us and being on again.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me again.
So we are going to go through some more insurance topics, and I love this because it's not a topic that I get to talk about a lot or even really understand, and it's like a bizarre, complicated world, so I'm glad you're here to be like my insurance translator and how we can protect fleets. One of the things that we're talking about and hearing a lot about are trailer loads, right? Always a target for nefarious behaviors and illicit things. We want to make sure fleets are protected. Can you give us a basic of maybe what the insurance load options, coverage, protections, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And I'll start with an insurance 101 for what we're going to call motor truck cargo or trip transit coverage. So
Perfect.
there's typically two different coverages to insure your cargo or your trailer load, really, as you called it. But it really depends on whether you're hauling your own product or the goods of someone else. So for the majority of the time, I'm going to probably spend on motor truck cargo, which is goods of others, just because I feel like it's, good for the audience here. But essentially, motor truck cargo protects the cargo you transport for your clients that are in your custody. And so majority of companies are going to require you, when you're hauling for them, to carry a certain amount of limit in the event that a loss happens, right? And so this is going to help protect your financial impact of a loss, but also really protects the relationship with the company, because no one wants an uncovered claim. It's bad for your business, it's bad for their business, and it's just bad for relationships altogether. So when it comes to motor truck cargo insurance, each insurance policy is going to be structured differently, but the majority of policies will protect you for perils such as fire, collision, water damage, refrigeration failure. And what everyone is talking about nowadays is a loss caused by theft. So if you're hauling your own goods, typically you can find coverage for trip transit, it's called. So, and it's an extension on your property policy. So different than when you're hauling goods for others, but if you're hauling your own goods, you can get this through an extension on your property policy. And because of everything that we're hearing, I think it's a good idea to talk a little bit about theft, right? That's what we hear. We see a lot of on the news, all these cargo, whether it's on the rail, whether it's tractor trailers, you see a lot of these loads being broken into, and you see some of the product still there. I'm sure some of the product is being sold elsewhere. And so it's really good, I think, to focus on this peril that's, theft. Now, for your motor truck cargo policy and for the property and transit policy, your standard insurance agreement is going to exclude any coverage from employee theft, right? So there are coverages for if someone external from your company is going to, happen to steal your product, but from an inside job. So criminal activity by one of your employees is typically excluded. So think about valuable commodities that can be liquidated fast, whether it's an employee theft or if it's a non-employee theft, copper pipes, beer, retail goods. Those are going to present a higher risk of, theft. And so depending on what insurance carrier you're working with, you can sometimes find coverage under your motor truck cargo insurance. But if not, to bridge that gap, what we recommend is finding coverage or purchasing a crime policy, which would cover your employee dishonesty. And so another, what I think is an important exclusion to talk about is theft from an unlocked or unattended vehicle in a trailer, right? So at a location for typically more than 72 hours, that's going to be excluded. But an unattended vehicle is also going to be excluded. I drive a lot for work. Sometimes I'm at these rest stops and I don't see anyone. And I see these guys jumping out, they're walking around, they're talking to their friends that they usually see. That poses a pretty big, significant risk. And what I'll talk about later is that you have people and organized crime that are going to watch after and are tracking, and they are doing surveillance. So if there's a trend, someone's going to find an easy way to steal your product or even steal the entire truck, right? That's something that we see too. So what I think is most important here is really just work with your broker to understand your operation, know what's important to you, learn a little bit about your business, and make sure that they understand what's covered on your policy and what is not covered on your policy. You never want to be surprised when something happens and think you have insurance that's going to cover it, and then you end up finding that it's an uncovered peril, and now you're out, a certain dollar amount, and then potentially you have a client that is extremely unhappy.
Right. No, and I mean, I also get that from the fleet point of view. This is not the most exciting thing to talk, or it's very exciting in a very different way because, I don't even run a fleet, and this is all kind of terrifying to me. I mean, the inside job stuff, and I do want to get to the organized crime stuff. I've written about it before. Is like, yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and that is whether it's kind of done by people at the location, cybersecurity, all that stuff. But let me back up here. And just kind of going through. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're talking with our partners. We get the coverage we need so that we can have peace of mind. And it's good to reassess this stuff every so often because life changes, the world changes seemingly rapidly every day, right? So we want to make sure we have the right coverage there. And we've seen trailer thefts start to go through the roof here over the past 2 years with the start of the pandemic. So you want to make sure you have that proper coverage and lots of layers there. So once I get that set, okay, so lots of great bullet points that you provided there. When I do have a loss, let's stay on the theft because it is a hot topic here. When I do have a loss, how can I continue to work with my provider? What information should I be gathering to be able to share to my provider to make that claim and process less painful than it just inherently is?
Right, of course. So there's 4 conditions, I will say, when you're looking at filing a claim for any type of loss. And I know you just said theft, but I'm just going to kind of go high level on what these 4 conditions are. 1, there must be a physical loss to the property. So, if it's damaged or stolen, of course, you're going to have coverage. But how was it damaged? So if it was ruined because of how the truck was handled when driving, you're not going to get coverage for that. So it must be a physical loss to the property. It has to be unanticipated and accidental. It also has to be from an outside force. And how I talk about this with my clients and prospective clients is that if you are hauling food products, for instance, and you have avocados and they over ripen in transit because they're just perishable by nature, you're not going to get coverage for that. That's not what your insurance policy is for. But let's just say you're hauling milk and you have a refrigerated truck, and for some reason that refrigeration failed, then you would get coverage because of that refrigeration failure coverage. Again, all of this comes down to making sure that that's how the policy is structured. So working with your broker to make sure. But if you're in the business of hauling food and you have refrigerated trailers, then most likely you should have that coverage put on. And then lastly, I think it's pretty self-explanatory that the loss must occur while you're in transit, right? You have to be driving, it has to be in the trailer. And so for the next topic really I wanted to talk about was once a loss happens, what do you do? And there's going to be unfortunate situations where a loss happens. I would love to say that all of my clients have never seen a loss, but there are situations outside of everything that you can think of where a loss could happen. So if something does happen, I would say first and foremost, you're going to want to minimize the loss. So your insurance policy is going to say, and it's going to read something along the lines of, you must take the reasonable steps to minimize any additional damage or prevent additional damage. So simply removing the product from the trailer or unpackaging if that's possible. Part of that is minimizing any future loss. Next, you're going to want to document the loss, right? You're going to want to take photos right away. You're going to want to determine, if possible, what the quantity that is either stolen, lost, damaged. Keep any receipts that you have with your customer, with your client, with any type of FOB. All of those documents, make sure that you have or you're able to get easily. And then I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say that while all of this is happening, you should absolutely be notifying your insurance broker and or the carrier, because in certain situations where it's a tough loss, whether it's a collision, product is all over the highway, which we hear about all the time. Potentially, it's a really tough claim, people are injured, or it's a really bad theft. They might want to deploy additional resources out to the scene as soon as possible. So as soon as you can get on the phone with your broker, absolutely do that. And then they can determine when to, reach out to the carrier to let them and notify them of the potential claim.
Right, for sure. Because I loved how you just put it in bullet points here and just kind of laid it out. Because as you were going through those things, like my stomach was turning. This is all hypothetical. This isn't happening to me, but I feel the gut punch of the, oh God, this phone call this just ruined my week, my month, my year. Like this is just terrible. And being on the receiving end of it, you feel like the world is over. The world has ended, and now I have to figure out and deal with this. But in talking with a good partner that can okay, just get this. I did want to go back real quick because I wanted to pick at the refrigeration example if I could, just to get a better understanding over here. So you said if I'm hauling milk, refrigeration fails, that I can potentially recoup losses there, right?
Keyword is potentially.
Right. Okay. So.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask. Like how, so then as a carrier, like for example, I'm guessing if I forgot to put diesel in the refrigeration unit, that is that covered? If it fails because it ran out of gas, or does it have to mechanically fail? Do I have to have any preventative maintenance records to provide? How do I document the failure? And you don't have to go into the details of that, but those are just kind of the things that go into mind of, the nuances. How do I talk about those nuances?
I would have to look at a policy specifically to be able to say
Right.
what exactly is covered and what exactly is uncovered. So for instance, the perishable products, or like I said, the example of the milk being ruined, obviously depends on what exactly the definition of the loss is, who writes the policy. There's so much that goes into it. That's why I said I think it's very important for you to work with your broker to be able to say, I know exactly what's being covered and what's not being covered. So it's tough to be able to say what specifically would have to go wrong, whether it was the diesel, whether or not it was tampered with, whether or not the driver did something wrong. I know one example is setting a refrigeration to plus 32 instead of negative 32. Which you do hear about. Unfortunately, you do hear about that. And so I hate to say that it depends, but when it comes to reading a policy, it all really depends on how it was structured, because what we try to do, if possible, is manuscript some of the wording to make sure that it covers each business appropriately, but only it depends on how far the insurance carrier will go.
Right. No, so it's probably a good thing to have fleets do what we're just doing now. Let me throw some hypotheticals at you and see if my policy cover it or doesn't cover it, because a lot, understanding how the policy is written and the legalese that goes into that can be pretty difficult. But, putting the scenario in there and the protections, definitely important. I do want to get back to something you mentioned earlier too on the protections, going back to the cargo theft, and we know that organized crime is out there. We know for those high value loads, they're getting information. You've kind of talked earlier about the inside job aspect, which is scary enough, but there's also, is there a cybersecurity or insurance benefit there too? I know even at my company, we have cybersecurity training every 6 months. It's a big topic. Everybody's talking about it. What do we offer on the insurance side to cover us for that in terms of the load losses?
Yeah, you've mentioned it, it's something that's definitely becoming more and more popular. It's been happening though for 20 to 30 years. We see organized crime. It's a lucrative and it's a low risk revenue stream for them, right? And so, as you mentioned, it's a lot of the time getting information from the inside. And then they provide surveillance on the warehouse and the tracking when the loads are leaving, how often, all of that. But there is a definite concern on whether or not these organizations can hack into a company system, right, and gain access to the load information. Now, what they do with the information is the real question. And so this is why cyber insurance covering something like, someone hacking into a system and stealing the load is tricky. So are they manipulating the data so that the drop-off locations are different, or they're changing around the purchase orders so the company is different? Is that the way that they're hacking into the system? And, gaining access to the goods, or
Right.
are they getting into the system, looking around, doing some snooping and finding out, hey, we can intercept this truck while they're at this rest stop or at this location. So it's tough, right? And that's why it's the whole purpose of cyber insurance really is the investigative part. And how do you determine that someone has either logged in and was snooping around, or someone logged in and started manipulating the data and changing out purchase agreements? So it is challenging. Cyber insurance is a newer product, and there's been an uptick in claims in the last 5 or so years. And so the policies vary very significantly. I mean, each carrier has a very different policy, and the forms are different, and the language is different, and what it covers is different. So I would say, to protect a company, anyone that could potentially have someone come in and alter or look into their system, is first and foremost, do a vulnerability study, right? Look and see where there are holes in your security system. At the very least, make sure that you have multi-factor authentication. That's going to be MFA. I'm sure you probably hear about it if you're doing, cyber training and whatnot. We're seeing this actually be a requirement for many of the cyber insurance carriers, that you have to at least have MFA, and that just helps keep out the bad guys, essentially, right? And so find a carrier and find a broker that really understands the cyber insurance marketplace, and then they can negotiate specifically coverages for your business on your behalf that are going to be tailored to you. And so I think the whole theme around, everything I've been talking about the last handful of minutes is making sure that you're working with a carrier and a broker that are going to tailor the insurance policy to your business. Because what you can get sometimes are just off the shelf policies, and that's great if you're a widget manufacturer, but is that what you need if you're hauling specific products, or you have a potential cyber or crime loss? Not necessarily. You're going to want something that's tailored specifically to your business.
Yeah, and I mean, even to piggyback on that, as fast as it changes, I mean, you have to revisit this stuff, because even you mentioned, I mean, I've heard about the cybersecurity and an insurance angle, but I hadn't heard about the going in and changing things, or changing I mean, that's happening. They're going in and just changing the purchase order, or changing the delivery point. I mean, that's wild. That
it's happening more often. It's
Oh my
new,
goodness.
right? It's scary. It's very scary. I mean, from cyber insurance, I'm sure you hear ransomware, people coming in, hacking
Yep.
your system so you can't get out and do anything. And I mean, that can happen to third-party logistic companies. It can happen really to anyone.
Right.
You have social engineering, where you hear, people saying, "Hey, I need a wire transfer right now," and it's a CEO of the company, and you're like, "Okay, I got to do it right now," and it's really some jokester outside that's
Yep.
going to get money, right? And so it's scary, and I think that these quote unquote bad guys are finding ways. They're very intelligent, very smart, to hack into systems and manipulate anything that they possibly can to benefit themselves.
Right. Yeah, they just need to weigh in. And as you noted, you got to do a vulnerability assessment. But spoiler alert, it's the people, the humans that are working with you are the weakest. Like, myself included, I've already sent like my mother's maiden name to like everybody that's emailed me today. It's in my email signature just in case, because I get asked so much. But no, I mean, it's serious stuff that you got to really take a look at. As far as, even just bringing it back across the whole insurance gamut here, really just having the person that you can talk to, which I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and just revisiting it, right? Coming back to it, because the world changes, and your needs will change too, for sure.
Absolutely. And policies change. We get notifications all the time from our head of technical development gentleman here that says, "Hey, this carrier changed their form as of 1/22," and we're like, "Okay, good to know." And so we know that going into a renewal for a client, that this could be a concern for them. And so making sure that we're up to speed with all of the latest and greatest forms and endorsements, and also the exclusions, because sometimes a carrier gets burned. If they get burned over and over again by something that happens, most likely they're going to put an exclusion on there. Just like now everyone has communicable disease exclusions on all of their policies because of the pandemic. So
Oh,
if
goodness.
cyber or, motor truck cargo starts to see, a trend of certain claims, they could always put on an exclusion. And so making sure that you're looking at the coverage every year is, I would say, critical to making sure that you're properly covered and just not having an uncovered claim.
Yeah, for sure, because that's just the worst. I mean, some of those things you run into and you can't predict, but you want to try to cover yourself. And to your point, carriers know where their weak spots are. They have a good idea of why issues crop up. So making sure you have all those covered. Some of this new stuff is great to look at too, and really just having some of the, because I feel much better now. I mean, I was scared by all these hypotheticals, but now I feel like we have it in hand.
I was nervous I was going to scare you even more.
No, it's all very, very interesting and very cool. And being able to talk with the partner that knows how to go about it, I mean, just brings a great peace of mind. So that's one of the big key things. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been wonderful to catch up as always.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the next time.